Welcome everyone to the hobby desk. So today I'm going to be making raised flower beds. Yes, that's incredibly rock and roll, I know. But mainly for Marvel Crisis Protocol. So I'm aiming for something right about this kind of size. About 2 inches long. Yeah, there's a joke there somewhere. And I'm aiming for that kind of size because it's a size 2 in the game for Marvel Crisis Protocol. For those in the game will know exactly what I'm talking about. But of course you can also use it for other tabletop games, like bolt action, things like that. And you don't have to use little shrubs, but it's something cheap and easy to make. It should take about half an hour to an hour. So how do you make these flower beds? Well, you could use foam core. So foam core comes in several different densities. Now I'm not talking about the foam core. If I pushed it like that, it would leave fingerprints. This is not the crazy hard one that you have to cut with an angle grinder. No, not quite that bad. A reasonable knife. This stuff will cut very easy with a craft knife, not a problem. But it's not too soft that if I pushed on it, it would leave fingerprints. That's purely because you want it to be fairly durable. So if you're going to club playing, things like that, you don't want these to be bashed around, knocked around too much. That's the material I would use if I wanted to, let's move my light a little bit closer, if I wanted to make more of a ceramic kind of flower bed, you know, a flower box, that kind of thing, which is fine, totally great, easy to work with, easy to paint, very impressionable if you want to roll a rock on it or something and leave a great texture behind. The only trouble is if you're using super glue or if you're spray priming, for example, it could react and melt. So I will be using this personally, plus I'm tight. Rule number 1 in the hobby, never throw anything away. I like to keep these for buildings. So like I was saying, roll a rock on it, leave great texture, or grid it up and make some block work. It looks fantastic. But what I will be using for my flower beds, because I want more of a granite kind of trough to put the flowers in. What gives a good granite texture and is durable, and I can super glue and spray paint? Cork. Simple cork sheets. Use it on loads of stuff. And this is about the gauge you want. I'm aiming for something about 3 to 4 mil thickness. Of course you can go thicker if you wish, no problem. So I'm going to be using cork for mine. I'm going to be using a good old trusty steel ruler. A cutting mat, because it's me and I want to protect my table a little bit, although it's a hobby craft table. Nice, decent sharp knife. And then I'll make up the basic box, and then for this trough, super glue it and show you what happens next. So yeah, I use approximately 2 inch by 1 inch piece, inch high. The reason I do it that high is I can imagine if you're in some kind of supermarket and you see these big flower tubs nearby, things like that, they're going to be, I mean, the average height of a Marvel model is about this, and that's basically what I'm making it for. You know, it's taller than 1 inch. So I'm thinking, how high are these flower things going to come? About halfway up on a person. So that's about what I'm doing. But the principle is the same if you want to build it at a different scale. I'm making these personally for Marvel Crisis Protocol. I'm thinking they're a size 2. They're going to be thrown. You know, they're definitely lamppost kind of size. I'm not thinking car size, so I'm not going that big. But this is what I'm doing. So I'm going to be sticking these with super glue. So the 2 inch pieces, there's a tiny little money spider on me. The 2 inch pieces on the sides, inch piece there. And then I'm going to put a fake floor in it, which I will show you what I mean by fake floor in a second. So yeah, I'll mark these up with a pen, and this kind of cork cuts really nicely. But it's important to have a nice sharp knife and just take your time and do multiple thin cuts rather than do one harsh cut, push, and then tear a bit of the corner off, things like that. Because I did tear a little bit off there. Bit over keen, so just take your time. So putting a fake floor in it, means you have to put less what we're going to be using as earth in it, and it also adds to some rigidity, which means if I try to do that, I can't squeeze the sides in. I'm not going to crush it. It's a bit more durable, less likely to break. Speaking of which, if you've got an edge you're not entirely happy with, get some sandpaper. It doesn't matter how harsh it is really, because this stuff is very forgiving, especially if the super glue is still a little bit dry. If you try to clean up the edges like so, it actually fills in the little gaps as well. As you're sanding it, all the fine bits of cork will adhere to the super glue. And it is very forgiving. So I'll just straighten up a few edges now. It's not looking too bad. Now I've used the same technique when making cork buildings. I think cork is quite a good medium really to make buildings because it's already has the texture. It's slightly absorbent, but without being too absorbent. When you're airbrushing and priming with a rattle can, things like that, it really will stick to the surface because obviously it's not a smooth surface. It really does take quite well. And that being said, I will now paint it. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to rattle can it initially just to seal it. Some good old cheapy grey primer. And we'll come back and talk about how I paint my stone. Okay, so this is just sealing it lightly with the rattle can. So it's very basic. You can leave it like that if you wanted to. It is a bit plain, a bit boring. So what I'm going to do is, rather than painting stone just grey, I do think that is very simple. Stone isn't very often grey in real life. There are greens, and blues, all sorts of colours in it. So I'm going to airbrush purely for speed, a combination of a few colours. I'm going to put a khaki with a grey, and then we're going to put some washes over it. So I've mixed up, like I said, a grey, dropped a little bit of khaki in there and a little bit of green. So it's just basically an off grey. I'm just going to do a couple places one colour, and blend it a couple places another colour. So you can be as fussy as you want with this. You don't have to spend ages. I don't want the stone looking too uniform and plain. So I'm just going to paint it a little bit like that. So it's a little bit different. Probably should be wearing rubber gloves for this. So what I'd like to do with stone now is to give it a little bit of a Chthonian camo shade and null oil, 50-50 mix of those two, and I normally drop a bit of medium in there as well to give it a bit more of an interesting look. So even though they're washes, they're shades, I still give them a good old shake. Of course, you could always drop a bit of Agrax or something into it as well, get a bit of a brownie wash. But I just like to plaster this stuff on so it gets in all the recesses. And it's not too dark, but this is just my own personal preference. I mean, you can make it as dark as you like, because this is supposed to be granite. Now, if you notice, I'm not just making it nice and smooth, sideways strokes, giving it some irregularities, like around there. Not too uniform is what I'm aiming for. So even though this is like a slab of granite in my head, I don't want it too uniform. So like I said, I'm adding a little bit of green to it. But you can add some blues to it, whatever you like, just to make stone a bit more interesting. Now if this was stone block work, I would pick out like every, I don't know, fourth stone block a different colour, like maybe like a khaki colour or a sandy colour, just to add some difference in there. Now that's nice and dry, you can always dry brush it with whatever you would like. You know, your greeny tones, a bluey tone, I'm going to bring it back slightly to grey on the highlights, so I'm just going to test it underneath. Yes, relatively dry brush. So good old knackered makeup brush, because I do like to look good for the channel, right? So I'm just going to pick it up on the edges, like so. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, because it's only basically going to be a hunk of granite. It's the next stage that's really going to pop, I believe. So the next stage is quite a fun stage, adding the dirt. So the dirt, I mean, you could use actual dirt if you wanted to. There's loads of different products out there that produce some wicked effects, but if you're anything like me and you have somebody in your life that is freezing cold all the time, and they use these things, heat pockets. So not the liquid stuff, the gritty stuff. If you ever wonder what's inside, well, I can tell you. So rule number 1, never chuck anything away. Heat pad dust. There we go, in a salted caramel container. So this is what it looks like. Quite earthy looking dust, and that's what I'm going to use. So if you cut those little pockets open after it's been used, obviously let it cool down a bit. I never chuck anything away, as you can tell. You could use some tea bags, you could use anything like that. So I like to do hobby on a budget, so rather than buying a massive box of what looks like dirt from a hobby store, which is brilliant, they do look great, there's some great different products out there. I like to use whatever stuff is lying around, and this stuff is fantastic. Obviously if you use actual dirt, make sure you cure it. There could be some issues there with mould and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is just add a bit of PVA onto this section. So good old fashioned, real cheap, basic PVA. Doesn't have to be like wood glue or anything mega strong. I'm just going to get a good old dollop of that in there and sprinkle some of this in. So good old wood glue would work, granted, if you've got any of that lying around. But I'm just going to use some standard PVA, just work it around in there and sprinkle some of this stuff on top. So now the messy bit's over and done with. So this stuff looks pretty good. Rather than just looking like brown, it's actually got a few interesting bits in it. Because I can imagine people have put fag butts and they've put some rubbish in there walking past. This is going to be a piece of terrain for a city. You know, it's never clean in there. There's bits of straws and whatnot. So I wanted a bit more realism, so I use heat pad dust. Because it's got, like I said, a few interesting different bits in there. I'm not really sure what it is. I think it's like metallic-y sections, different tones. So I thought that looked pretty good. So put that in there. Now, whatever you would like to add to your flower container. So I'm not a very flowery person. If you've ever seen my garden, you can probably guess that. I like trees. I like trees and shrubs and things like that. So, I have got, from a bring and buy stall, I had a load of these. So what are these, Ross? These, I think it's £1 because I'm dirt cheap, right? Basically, it's for trains. But it's the scale that I want to use, and it also works great for Marvel as well. I've had this for ages because rule number 1, never chuck anything away. So I'm going to grab a few of these and just start sticking them into the cork below the earth. So I do it this way around rather than sticking them in and then trying to pour the glue in there and the earth in there, and it makes a bit of a mess. So if I do it like this, you've waited a few hours, the PVA glue would go off fairly hard. So you can just drill a small hole, push these guys in with a tiny little bit of glue. This is what I prefer, but if you get from like Woodland Scenics, make some very good flowers. World War Scenics do flower tufts. So if you ever see tufts that you can get from like army painted little tufts, things like that, it's very similar to that, but they've got the odd sprinkling flowers in there. It looks wicked, it looks fantastic. If you want to use that, brilliant, not a problem. Me, I like trees. So that's what I'm going to do. Drill a few holes and stick some trees in there. So there you have it. Some raised flower beds. Really, really, really dirt cheap. Yeah, I went there. So just cork, PVA glue, super glue, whatever flower type material you want. Obviously I've used these tiny little armatures. They are supposed to be for train layouts, but I didn't want a great big tree. I wanted a few little shrubby kind of trees. So I think it's perfect for that. It's what I wanted for the game. I wanted something for Marvel Crisis Protocol at size 2. If you're into the game, you'll probably know what I mean. And I think it ticks the boxes. So dustbins are size 1, street lamps, things like that are about size 2. And I thought that'd be ideal. So I was tired of just having street lamps. I thought sometimes if you've got like a flowery garden or something like that in your city for Marvel, it'd be brilliant. But it's also fantastic for dioramas, anything like bolt action if you want, troops going through gardens, things like that. Yeah, for anything for a miniature model game. And even if it's a different scale to what you're used to, you can still adapt these skills to your game. I hope this helped you guys. Thank you very much for watching. And please, hobby safe.